There are moments in life when something subtle begins to change, long before anything obvious happens on the surface. You might notice it in the quiet spaces of your day. Maybe it's the way certain conversations no longer hold your attention the way they used to. Maybe it's the strange feeling that something in your life is rearranging itself, even though you can't fully explain how or why. It's not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with noise or warning. It's more like a quiet shift in perspective that slowly begins to alter how you see people, opportunities, and even yourself. Many people who go through periods of personal growth describe this exact feeling. It's like standing in the same room you've always been in, yet somehow the lighting has changed. The furniture is still there. The walls haven't moved, but the atmosphere feels different. And sometimes, during phases like this, life has a way of placing unexpected encounters in front of you. Not the kind you can predict, not the kind you can plan for. Just moments where paths cross, conversations unfold, or introductions happen in ways that seem ordinary on the outside but leave a deeper impression afterward. If you've been sensing that something within you has been shifting lately, you're not alone in that experience. Personal growth often begins quietly. It doesn't start with big announcements or visible milestones. Instead, it begins with small internal realizations that slowly reshape how you interact with the world around you. Maybe you've noticed that you've become more selective with your time. Situations that once felt normal might now feel draining. Certain patterns you used to tolerate may now stand out more clearly. This doesn't mean you're distancing yourself from people out of judgment. More often, it simply means your awareness has expanded. When awareness expands, the way you move through life naturally changes. You begin paying attention to things that previously went unnoticed. You hear subtleties in conversations. You sense when environments feel supportive and when they don't. You start recognizing which connections bring clarity into your life and which ones leave you feeling mentally scattered. These changes can sometimes create a feeling of isolation, even when nothing dramatic has happened. It's not uncommon for people in periods of deep reflection to feel slightly out of sync with their surroundings. Friends may still talk about the same things they've always talked about. Daily routines continue. The world keeps moving at its usual pace. But internally, something feels different. You might find yourself asking deeper questions than you used to. Questions about direction, questions about meaning, questions about whether certain paths still align with who you are becoming. These questions aren't signs that something is wrong. In many ways, they're signs that your perspective is evolving. Growth rarely happens in perfectly comfortable environments. Most of the time, it begins during phases when your old ways of thinking start to feel too small for the person you're gradually becoming. And during times like this, something interesting often happens. Life begins presenting people, ideas, or conversations that mirror the changes already happening inside you. Not because there's some mysterious force controlling everything, but because when your awareness shifts, you naturally begin noticing things that previously passed right by you. Think about how often people say they suddenly started seeing opportunities once they changed their mindset. It's not that the opportunities magically appeared overnight. More often, they were always there, quietly existing in the background. The difference is that a new level of awareness made them visible. The same principle applies to encounters with people. Sometimes, the most meaningful interactions don't come from carefully planned meetings. They happen in everyday moments that seem insignificant at first. A brief conversation that unexpectedly lingers in your mind long after it ends. A random introduction that gradually turns into a valuable connection. A chance moment where someone says something simple, yet it reframes the way you think about your next step. These moments don't always feel life-changing in the exact second they happen. Often, their significance becomes clear only after some time has passed. Looking back, you realize that certain interactions appeared at very particular stages in your personal journey. But for that to happen, something important usually takes place first. You change, not in a dramatic, overnight transformation kind of way, more like a gradual recalibration of how you think, what you value, and how you respond to situations that once triggered automatic reactions. You might notice that you pause more before responding to things that used to frustrate you. You might realize that you no longer feel the same urge to prove yourself in conversations where people are competing for attention. You might start recognizing that your energy feels more stable when you spend time in environments that encourage calm thinking rather than constant noise. These subtle adjustments create a ripple effect in your life, because the way you carry yourself begins influencing the kinds of interactions you experience. For example, when someone becomes more comfortable with their own direction, they often stop chasing validation from people who never truly understood them in the first place. That shift alone changes the dynamic of many relationships. Conversations become more genuine because you're no longer trying to perform a version of yourself that fits someone else's expectations. You start showing up as the person you're actually becoming. And interestingly, when that happens, life tends to bring new conversations into your path. Some of them are brief. Some of them evolve into meaningful connections. And some arrive at moments when you weren't actively looking for anything at all. There's a reason why people often describe certain encounters as unexpected but strangely timely. It's not about predicting the future or assuming that every interaction carries some hidden message. It's about recognizing that personal growth often shifts the kinds of experiences we attract and notice. When your mindset evolves, your conversations evolve. When your priorities change, the environments you gravitate toward begin changing as well. And when your sense of identity becomes clearer, the people you resonate with naturally become different too. But reaching that point requires navigating a stage that many people underestimate. The stage where things feel uncertain. Growth doesn't always feel inspiring while it's happening. In fact, some of the most important internal shifts happen during periods when you feel slightly disconnected from your old routines, but haven't fully stepped into new ones yet. It can feel like standing between two versions of your life. The familiar version that once felt comfortable, and the emerging version that still feels undefined. During this phase, patience becomes an important skill. Because when identity shifts are taking place, forcing clarity too quickly can actually create more confusion. It's similar to adjusting your eyes in a dim room. If you rush, everything looks blurry. But if you give your vision a moment to settle, shapes slowly begin to appear. The same thing happens with personal direction. Clarity tends to reveal itself gradually, often through experiences and interactions rather than sudden realizations. You might meet someone who introduces you to a perspective you hadn't considered before. You might hear a story that challenges a belief you've held for years. You might even observe someone navigating life in a way that quietly inspires you to rethink your own approach. None of these moments require dramatic explanations. They're simply part of the natural process of evolving awareness. And sometimes, one conversation can shift how you see an entire chapter of your life. Not because that person holds all the answers, but because the exchange opens a new way of thinking. When people talk about encounters that changed everything, they rarely mean that their life transformed instantly. What they usually mean is that a new idea entered their mind, and that idea gradually influenced the decisions they made afterward. Decisions shape direction. Direction shapes outcomes, and outcomes reshape the story of your life over time. So when you feel that quiet internal shift happening, it's worth paying attention to the subtle changes around you. not in a hyper-analytical way, just with simple awareness. Because sometimes the next conversation you have, the next introduction you experience, or the next perspective you hear might arrive at a moment when you're finally ready to see something differently. And when that happens, even a small interaction can open the door to an entirely new direction. Not because it was predicted, not because it was guaranteed, but because you had reached a point in your personal growth where that moment could finally be recognized for what it was. A simple encounter with the potential to influence how you see the road ahead. And often, those kinds of encounters appear when a person has quietly outgrown the version of themselves that once settled for less awareness. They appear when someone begins listening more closely to their own internal signals. They appear when someone becomes willing to pause long enough to question whether their current direction truly reflects who they are becoming. That willingness to reflect is where deeper change begins. Because once a person starts thinking differently about their path, their future interactions begin unfolding through an entirely new lens. And the fascinating thing about that process is that it rarely feels dramatic in the beginning. It simply feels like something within you has become more attentive, more curious, more open to perspectives that once felt irrelevant. From the outside, nothing about your life may appear drastically different. But internally, you know something has shifted. You're noticing patterns you didn't notice before. You're recognizing opportunities that once seemed invisible. You're becoming more aware of the subtle ways conversations shape your mindset. And the more this awareness grows, the more your environment begins reflecting that change back to you. Through people, through experiences, through moments that quietly remind you how much your perspective has expanded. So if you've recently felt like something in your life is slowly repositioning itself, like certain doors are closing, while unfamiliar possibilities begin appearing in the distance, you might simply be in the middle of one of those transitional phases that precede meaningful encounters. Not encounters that arrive with fireworks or dramatic announcements, but the kind that enter your life quietly and leave a lasting impression long after the moment has passed. Because sometimes the most important turning points in life don't start with massive decisions. They begin with conversations, unexpected introductions, or a brief moment where two paths cross in a way neither person originally planned. And only later do you realize how much that moment influenced the direction that followed. If you've ever experienced something like that before, you already know how subtle yet powerful those moments can be. They don't demand attention. They simply appear. And whether they become meaningful often depends on one simple factor: whether you're present enough to recognize them when they arrive. If this reflection resonates with experiences you've had in your own life, feel free to share your perspective. Conversations often reveal insights that someone else may have been quietly thinking about as well. And sometimes, hearing how others interpret their own turning points can bring surprising clarity to our own journeys. As life continues moving forward, one of the most interesting things people begin to notice during periods of internal change is how their perception of everyday interactions starts to evolve. Conversations that once felt routine may begin to reveal layers you hadn't noticed before. The way someone phrases a simple sentence, the energy behind a question, or even the pauses in between words can suddenly feel more meaningful. It's not that you've become overly analytical. It's more that your awareness has become more refined. When awareness deepens, people often start recognizing patterns in their experiences. Certain situations repeat themselves in different forms. Similar types of people appear in different environments. Familiar themes surface in conversations with strangers. At first, this can feel confusing. You might wonder why certain lessons seem to show up again and again in different areas of life. But over time, many people realize that repetition isn't necessarily a problem. Often, it's simply how the mind processes growth. Imagine someone learning a new skill. At first, they encounter basic challenges. Then slightly more advanced versions of those same challenges appear. The situations look different on the surface, but the underlying principle remains the same. Personal development works in a similar way. The people we meet, the conversations we have, and the environments we move through often act as mirrors reflecting where we are mentally and emotionally. And sometimes, when a person has reached a certain stage of growth, life introduces someone whose perspective aligns with that moment of transformation. Not in a dramatic or mystical sense, but in a very practical human way. Think about how often people say something like, "I met them at the exact time I needed that conversation." Usually, what they mean is that their mindset had reached a point where they were finally open to hearing something new. Before that moment, the same words might not have made any impact at all. Timing plays an interesting role in human connection. Two people can cross paths years earlier and barely notice each other. Yet if they meet again later, after both have experienced different chapters of life, the interaction can feel completely different. It's the same people, but different levels of awareness, and awareness shapes how we interpret everything. During periods of personal transition, this awareness tends to become more active. You begin noticing how certain interactions energize you while others leave you feeling mentally drained. You start recognizing which conversations expand your thinking and which ones seem to revolve around the same repetitive loops. This doesn't mean you suddenly disconnect from everyone who doesn't share your perspective. Life isn't that simple, and healthy relationships involve many different viewpoints. But something subtle does begin to change. You become more intentional about where your attention goes. You start valuing depth over noise. A meaningful 10-minute conversation may begin to feel more valuable than hours of surface-level interaction. And this shift, naturally, alters the types of encounters that stand out in your life. For example, imagine walking into a room full of people. A few years ago, you might have focused on who seemed the most impressive, the most confident, or the most socially dominant. Those were the signals that once captured your attention. But after going through periods of reflection and growth, the signals you notice may become completely different. You might pay attention to how someone listens rather than how loudly they speak. You might notice sincerity rather than status. You might feel drawn toward calm presence rather than constant performance. These subtle shifts in perception can completely reshape how new connections form. Because when your priorities change, the qualities you value in others naturally evolve as well. And sometimes, this leads to encounters that feel surprisingly refreshing. Not because the other person is extraordinary in some exaggerated sense, but because the interaction feels authentic in a way that has become increasingly rare. Authenticity tends to stand out when someone has spent enough time navigating environments where people feel pressured to present curated versions of themselves. Many individuals eventually reach a stage where they become tired of constant performance. The endless need to appear impressive, successful, or perfectly confident can begin to feel exhausting. During that stage, authenticity becomes more appealing than perfection. Real conversations become more interesting than rehearsed ones. And when two people who share that mindset happen to cross paths, the interaction often feels effortless. There's no need to prove anything. No need to compete for attention. Just a natural exchange of thoughts, ideas, and perspectives. Encounters like that can leave a lasting impression because they remind us how simple, genuine human connection can actually be. Yet, interestingly, Those kinds of interactions often appear after someone has gone through periods of solitude or reflection. Solitude isn't always comfortable. Many people initially interpret it as loneliness or disconnection, but solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Loneliness often comes from feeling misunderstood or disconnected from others. Solitude, on the other hand, can become a space where the mind reorganizes itself, a place where thoughts settle, where old beliefs are examined, where personal direction becomes clearer without constant external influence. During these quieter periods, individuals often gain a deeper understanding of their own values. They start recognizing what truly matters to them and what they were previously pursuing simply because it seemed expected. Once that clarity begins forming, interactions with others naturally change. You start recognizing when someone's perspective genuinely resonates with your direction. And sometimes, those moments appear in the most ordinary circumstances. A conversation while waiting in line, a discussion during a routine meeting, an unexpected message from someone you haven't spoken to in years. None of these scenarios sound dramatic when described on paper, but their significance comes from the timing and the state of mind you're in when they happen. Because when a person has been reflecting deeply about their path, even a simple conversation can introduce a perspective that shifts how they approach the next phase of life. It doesn't happen through grand declarations. It happens through subtle realizations. For example, someone might casually mention a way of approaching a challenge that you've been struggling with. The comment might last only a few seconds, but later that evening, you find yourself thinking about it again. Something about the idea sticks with you. Over the next few days, you begin seeing your situation from a slightly different angle. And gradually, a solution that once seemed impossible begins to feel manageable. That entire shift started with a simple encounter. Not a lecture, not a life-changing speech, just a conversation that arrived at the right moment. These are the kinds of interactions many people reflect on years later when they talk about turning points in their lives. They rarely mention dramatic events. More often, they talk about small exchanges that quietly redirected their thinking. Because thinking influences action, and action shapes outcomes. This is why encounters during periods of personal growth can feel so impactful. Your mind is already in a state of reevaluating things. So when a new perspective enters that environment, it has room to grow. It becomes part of the ongoing conversation happening inside your own thoughts. And sometimes that internal conversation leads to decisions that gradually reshape your path. But another interesting aspect of growth is that it often requires releasing certain expectations about how life is supposed to unfold. Many people spend years believing their journey should follow a very specific sequence. Education leads to a career. A career leads to stability. Stability leads to a predictable future. And while structure can certainly provide security, life rarely unfolds in perfectly linear ways. Unexpected opportunities appear. Priorities change. Interests evolve. People discover new passions years after believing their direction was already decided. Encounters with others frequently play a role in those shifts. Someone shares an idea that sparks curiosity. A conversation introduces a field you had never considered before. A simple question causes you to rethink assumptions that once seemed permanent. These moments remind us that growth isn't about reaching a final version of ourselves. It's about remaining open to learning, remaining curious, remaining aware of how our understanding of the world continues expanding over time. And when that openness becomes part of someone's mindset, life begins to feel less rigid. Instead of trying to control every detail of the future, people start paying more attention to the opportunities unfolding in the present. That doesn't mean abandoning goals or direction. It simply means recognizing that meaningful change often emerges through interaction and experience rather than strict planning alone. Sometimes a single conversation can reveal possibilities that years of solitary thinking never uncovered. And that's one of the most fascinating aspects of human connection. Every person you meet carries a completely different set of experiences, lessons, and insights. When those perspectives intersect with your own journey, something new can emerge. A new idea, a new direction, or simply a deeper understanding of the path you're already on. And while no encounter guarantees a dramatic transformation, certain moments have a way of quietly influencing how the next chapter of life unfolds. Not through prediction, not through pressure, but through the simple exchange of perspective between two individuals who happen to cross paths at a particular point in their lives. Sometimes that's all it takes for a new way of seeing things to begin. Over time, when someone continues moving through these phases of reflection and quiet growth, another shift often begins to appear. It's the realization that not every meaningful moment in life announces itself when it arrives. Some of the most important experiences look completely ordinary at first. They don't come with a sense of destiny or dramatic music in the background. They arrive in everyday situations where nothing seems particularly unusual in the moment. But later, when you look back, you begin to see how that moment connected to something bigger in your life story. A conversation that lasted only a few minutes may later stand out as the first time you considered a new direction. A brief encounter with someone may later feel like the moment that encouraged you to trust a part of yourself you had been ignoring. When people reflect on these experiences, they often realize that what truly changed their path wasn't the encounter itself. It was the internal shift that the encounter triggered. Because once a person starts seeing themselves differently, everything else begins to follow. Their decisions begin to change. Their tolerance for environments that once drained them becomes lower. Their curiosity about what else might be possible begins to expand. This is why identity transformation rarely feels dramatic in the beginning. It's not a sudden reinvention of your life. It's a gradual process where you begin aligning your actions with the version of yourself you're growing into. For example, someone who once stayed silent in conversations may slowly begin sharing their thoughts with more confidence. Someone who once followed paths simply because they were expected may begin exploring options that genuinely interest them. Someone who once avoided change may begin welcoming it as a natural part of growth. These changes don't always happen all at once. They unfold through small choices repeated over time. And interestingly, as those choices accumulate, the people who appear in your life often begin reflecting the new direction you're taking. You may meet individuals who challenge your thinking in healthy ways. You may encounter conversations that expand your understanding of yourself. You may even notice that certain people who once played large roles in your daily life gradually fade into the background as your priorities evolve. None of this needs to be interpreted as conflict or separation. It's simply the natural result of personal evolution. As individuals grow, their environments and relationships naturally reorganize around the person they're becoming. And during that process, unexpected encounters often serve as small but meaningful turning points. Not because they carry some hidden message, but because they appear at moments when you're ready to receive a different perspective. The truth is, every person you meet is living within their own complex story. They carry lessons you haven't experienced yet. You carry insights they may never have considered. And when those two worlds intersect, even briefly, something valuable can emerge. a thought that stays with you, an idea that reshapes your approach, or a reminder that life is far more interconnected than it sometimes appears. But here's something that many people only realize after years of reflection. Meaningful encounters rarely happen when someone is trying too hard to force them. They tend to appear when a person is fully engaged in living their life, growing, learning, and moving forward with curiosity. When your attention is focused on becoming a more aware version of yourself, you naturally become more open to the kinds of interactions that expand your thinking. And those interactions can arrive anywhere: in professional environments, in everyday social settings, in brief conversations that last only a few minutes but leave a lasting impression. Sometimes they arrive through people who think very differently from you. Other times they appear through individuals who seem to understand your perspective almost immediately. But in every case, the true value of an encounter isn't determined by how dramatic it feels in the moment. It's determined by how it influences the way you think afterward. Because thinking shapes the decisions you make, and decisions shape the direction your life gradually moves toward. So if you've been feeling like something within you has been quietly shifting lately, like your awareness is expanding and your perspective on life is evolving, there's a good chance you're entering a phase where new interactions may begin appearing in ways you didn't expect. Not as predictions, not as guarantees, simply as natural moments that become meaningful because of the stage of life you're currently in. The important thing is not to overanalyze every encounter looking for hidden significance. The important thing is to remain present enough to recognize when a conversation genuinely resonates with you, to notice when someone's perspective opens a door in your thinking, to stay curious about the ways life introduces new ideas through the people we meet along the way. Because sometimes the next chapter of your journey doesn't begin with a major event. Sometimes it begins with a conversation that changes how you see yourself. And when your self-perception evolves, your entire approach to life begins evolving with it. You begin trusting your instincts more. You begin choosing environments that support your growth rather than limit it. You begin recognizing that your story is still unfolding, and that every experience adds another layer of understanding to who you are becoming. That realization alone can be incredibly powerful. It means that no matter where you are right now in your life, the path ahead is still open to new possibilities, new perspectives, new encounters that introduce ideas you haven't considered yet. And sometimes those ideas become the starting point for chapters you never imagined writing. The most important thing you can do during periods like this is remain open. Open to learning, open to listening, open to recognizing that growth doesn't always arrive through grand moments, but often through simple interactions that quietly reshape how we see the world. So if this reflection connected with something you've been feeling recently, if parts of your life have been shifting in subtle ways, and you've noticed your perspective evolving, take a moment to think about the encounters that have already influenced your journey, the conversations that stayed with you, the people who appeared during important transitions in your life. Often, reflecting on those moments reveals how much progress has already taken place. And it can also remind you that your story is still unfolding in ways you may not fully see yet. If any part of this message resonates with your experience, share your thoughts and perspectives below. Your story might be the exact insight someone else needs to hear today, and meaningful conversations often begin when people openly reflect on the moments that shaped them.